Guardian, founder of the Lanterns. May I ask you a question?
This is when most candidates ask, why me?
There is a reason The Lanterns Episode 3 may be more important than it first appears. On the surface, the episode looks like another step in the investigation, another chapter in the mystery surrounding Hal Jordan and John Stewart. But when you connect the trailer clues with what the episode actually reveals, a much bigger pattern starts to emerge. Certain conversations suddenly feel less innocent. Certain locations become more suspicious. And one detail in particular could completely change the meaning of what we thought we were watching. Because the real question after episode 3 isn't simply who is responsible, it's who has been controlling the investigation from the beginning. And if the episode's final developments are pointing where they seem to be pointing, then Hal and John may have walked directly into a situation designed to make them trust the wrong person. Episode 3 pushes Lanterns deeper into the central mystery by making the investigation feel increasingly personal. The early episodes establish the basic foundation. Something is seriously wrong, the case is connected to forces much larger than an ordinary crime, and Hal Jordan and John Stewart are being pulled toward answers that neither of them completely understands yet. But episode 3 changes the dynamic. Instead of simply giving the detectives another clue, the episode begins questioning the reliability of the clues they already have. That distinction matters. A traditional mystery gives the audience information and asks us to figure out how the pieces connect. Lanterns appears to be doing something more complicated. It gives us information while simultaneously making us question whether that information was intentionally placed in front of the characters. That becomes especially important when looking at Hal Jordan. Hal isn't approaching this investigation like someone who believes everything is random. His experience tells him that certain details don't fit together naturally. He has seen in enough strange situations to recognize when something feels staged, but his confidence can also become a weakness, because the more convinced he becomes that he understands a situation, the easier it may be for someone else to manipulate his assumptions. John, meanwhile, represents the opposite approach. He is still trying to understand the world he's entered, and that makes him more cautious. He doesn't have Hal's history or instincts, so he can't automatically accept Hal's conclusions. Their disagreement therefore becomes more than simple character conflict. It becomes one of the show's most important investigative tools. If Hal sees a pattern, John asks whether the pattern was created deliberately. And episode 3 increasingly suggests that question may be the key. The trailer also appears to emphasize the growing tension between the two lanterns, particularly through moments where their investigation seems to move beyond what either of them expected. The imagery doesn't simply promise another case. It hints that the mystery is connected to something capable of reaching into their personal lives and manipulating the environment around them. That is where the episode becomes genuinely interesting. Because if the people behind this mystery understand who Hal is, what he fears, and what John is beginning to discover, then the investigation may not actually be happening on their terms. It may be happening on someone else's. One of the biggest clues is the way the episode treats secrecy. Characters don't necessarily lie openly. Instead, they withhold information. They answer questions without answering the question being asked. And that creates a very specific atmosphere. Everyone appears to know something, but nobody seems willing to reveal the complete picture. That is usually a sign that the mystery isn't centered around one secret. It's centered around layers of secrets. And the deeper Hal and John go, the more those layers begin to overlap. This also gives the episode's ending greater significance. Rather than functioning as a simple reveal, the ending appears designed to reframe everything that came before it. A detail that seemed like background information suddenly carries more weight. A character who seemed peripheral becomes harder to ignore. And the investigation moves from asking what happened to asking why these particular people were positioned around the event in the first place. That shift is crucial. Because once the question changes from who did it to who benefits from us believing this version of events, the entire mystery becomes more dangerous. And that may be exactly what Lanterns wants us to notice before the next episode. The most important clue may not be the obvious evidence. It may be the person who seems completely unrelated to it. And this is where the episode becomes much more revealing, because once we stop looking at the mystery as a straightforward investigation, the behavior of Hal and John starts to make more sense. The biggest development is the growing realization that they aren't simply searching for evidence. They are also being tested. Every decision they make gives someone information about how they think. Every disagreement exposes their weaknesses. Every question they ask potentially tells the people watching them exactly how close they are to the truth. That creates a dangerous situation. Hal's greatest advantage is also his biggest vulnerability: experience. He recognizes patterns quickly, but that experience can cause him to trust his instincts before he has enough evidence. John doesn't have that same history, which makes him slower to accept certain conclusions. But that doesn't necessarily make John weaker. In a mystery like this, being willing to say, "we don't know yet," can be more valuable than having a confident answer. Episode 3 repeatedly plays with that contrast, and there is another layer hiding underneath it. The investigation is beginning to affect the relationship between the two lanterns themselves. Their partnership isn't simply about solving the case. It's becoming a test of whether they can actually trust each other when the evidence starts pointing in different directions. That's important because a conspiracy becomes far more powerful when it doesn't need to defeat its investigators physically. It only needs to make them doubt each other. If Hal believes John is missing something, and John believes Hal is becoming too emotionally invested, then whoever is behind the mystery doesn't necessarily have to confront them directly. The investigation can collapse under its own pressure. That possibility makes several moments in episode 3 more significant than they initially appear. Pay attention to the information characters choose to reveal, and more importantly, the information they don't reveal. In a story built around mystery, silence can be evidence. When someone avoids a direct answer, changes the subject, or suddenly becomes unusually cooperative, the reaction itself can be more revealing than the dialogue. Lanterns seems to understand that, which is why the episode rarely gives us a clean explanation without introducing another question immediately afterward. This is also where the ending becomes especially important. The final developments don't necessarily tell us everything about the larger threat. Instead, they narrow the possibilities. We begin to understand that the events surrounding the investigation aren't isolated. There is a connection between the personal, the political, and the strange forces surrounding the Lantern mythology. But the show is careful not to confirm every interpretation. That distinction matters. The strongest theory right now is that the central mystery could be connected to a larger operation that has been developing long before Hal and John became involved. If that's true, then the apparent crime may only be the visible part of something much bigger. But that's still a theory. What we can say with more confidence is that the episode deliberately expands the scope of the story. The danger isn't confined to one location or one suspect anymore. The investigation is starting to suggest a network of relationships, motives, and hidden agendas. And that changes how we should interpret the trailer material. Some of the trailer's most intense moments may not represent the immediate climax of the mystery. They could be fragments from a larger confrontation that only makes sense once we understand who is pulling the strings. That's a classic strategy for this kind of storytelling. Show the audience the consequence before revealing the cause. The result is that viewers may believe they already understand where the story is going, while the actual explanation remains several steps away. And then there's John. His position may become increasingly important because he isn't carrying the same emotional baggage as Hal. That gives him the potential to notice something Hal overlooks. If Hal is looking backward, trying to understand what happened, John may be the one looking sideways, noticing the people and relationships surrounding the investigation right now. That difference could eventually lead to the biggest breakthrough. It could also create the biggest conflict. Because if John discovers something that directly challenges Hal's interpretation, the partnership may reach a breaking point. And if that happens at exactly the moment the real enemy wants them divided, it may not be coincidence. It may be the plan. So the real question heading into the final stretch of this story isn't simply whether Hal and John will solve the mystery. It's whether they will recognize the trap before solving it becomes impossible. And the episode's final clues suggest that someone may already know exactly what they are going to do next. That brings us to the most important question left hanging after episode 3. If Hal and John are being pushed toward a specific conclusion, what happens when they finally realize that the investigation itself may be part of the trap? This is where the ending becomes more interesting than a simple reveal. The episode doesn't just leave us with another unanswered question. It changes the meaning of the investigation. Earlier, the goal seemed straightforward. Follow the evidence, identify the people involved, and uncover what really happened. But by the end, the bigger possibility is that the evidence has been curated for them. And if that is true, then the person controlling the situation doesn't need to hide every clue. They only need to control which clues are discovered first. That would explain why certain pieces of information feel almost too perfectly timed. It would also explain why the characters repeatedly seem to get close to an answer, only for another complication to appear. From the outside, that can look like normal mystery storytelling. But from inside the story, it could represent deliberate manipulation. Someone wants Hal and John to keep moving. The question is where. This theory also gives Hal's character arc a much deeper meaning. His experience has taught him to trust his instincts, but episode 3 may be preparing him for a situation where instinct alone isn't enough. The old version of Hal might see the pattern and immediately act. The version of Hal this story appears to be building may have to learn something much harder. Sometimes the smartest move is refusing to take the bait. John could become essential to that transformation. His role isn't simply to become Hal's partner or successor. He may ultimately become the person capable of challenging Hal when everyone else is too intimidated or uncertain to do it. And if their relationship survives the pressure of this investigation, it could become the foundation for everything that follows. But there is another possibility. What if the mystery isn't designed to destroy their partnership? What if it's designed to recruit them? That possibility becomes increasingly interesting when we consider the larger mythology surrounding the Lanterns. The story has the opportunity to move from a grounded detective mystery into something much larger. But the strongest version of that transition wouldn't happen overnight. It would begin with small inconsistencies, unexplained connections, and characters who appear ordinary until the larger picture comes into focus. Episode 3 feels like that transition point. The episode still gives us the language of a crime investigation, but underneath it, the story is preparing the audience for a much wider conflict. That also changes how we should interpret the title and imagery surrounding the series. The lantern concept isn't simply a superhero identity. Symbolically, a lantern represents illumination, finding something hidden in darkness. But there is an obvious danger in that metaphor. When you shine a light into darkness, you don't only reveal the truth, you reveal everything that was hiding there. Add that may be exactly what Hal and John are about to discover. The strongest prediction for what comes next is that the investigation will stop being reactive. Instead of simply following clues left behind by other people, Hal and John may finally identify a connection that allows them to take control of the investigation, but that victory probably won't come without a cost. Someone close to the case could become compromised. Evidence could disappear. A trusted character could reveal a completely different motivation. And most importantly, Hal may be forced to confront the possibility that his own assumptions have helped the enemy. That would give the story a powerful emotional payoff, because the biggest mistake wouldn't be failing to find the truth. It would be finding the wrong truth. And that's why the ending of episode 3 matters. It doesn't close the mystery. It tells us that we may have been asking the wrong question. Instead of asking who is behind everything, we should be asking why the investigators were allowed to discover certain things in the first place. Instead of assuming every clue moves the story forward, we should consider whether some clues are actually distractions. And instead of viewing Hal and John as hunters chasing a hidden enemy, we should consider the possibility that they have become targets themselves. That is the real danger going forward. Because once the investigators realize they're being watched, the rules change. And if the people behind this mystery have been one step ahead since the beginning, then episode 3 may not be the moment when Hal and John finally uncover the conspiracy. It may be the moment when the conspiracy realizes they are getting dangerously close. So the ending leaves us with one major possibility. The next stage of the story won't simply reveal another suspect. It could reveal that the entire investigation has been leading toward something much bigger than either lantern expected. And when that happens, the biggest mystery may no longer be what happened in episode 3. It may be why someone wanted Hal Jordan and John Stewart to find it at all.